This happened a few years ago. Where and when, I cannot place, but I'm just here to tell you the tale. Light the lamp, Mark begged. I can't, not yet. We have deeper and more darker areas to go to. We might as well save it for that, I said. How long are we going to be here? He rubbed his arms and shivered. However long it takes. As we continued walking, we studied the texture of the cave we were in, as we could barely see a thing. But when I saw something hanging over me, I just had to light the lamp. It was exactly what we were looking for. This is it, I cried in joy. Those are... Mark had a shocked yet seemingly scared voice. Beautiful. My gleaming voice and cheer cut him off. I just stared at them with a big smile, unaware of what I was really seeing. Mark backed away from me, slowly. He was frightened. Dylan, those are dead bodies, he screamed at me, crying soon afterwards. I looked again at the hanging objects. He was right. I was scared. They were tangled in electric wire. I knew it was somehow on, electrocuting the lifeless corpses, but what was it connected to? I turned back to face Mark. The expression on his face frightened me. He was extremely shocked. Looking directly behind me, all I did was run, not even looking behind me. As I ran past him, I tried to push him along, but he didn't move. He was just shoved, but he didn't move. He lost all conscious ability. I had no clue what he was looking at. I didn't want to know. I ran the hell out of that cave, scared for my life. I never seen Mark again, nor has anybody. But yesterday, I got some reception from his walkie-talkie. On that trip to the cave, we got walkie-talkies to stay in touch if we ever lost contact. The talkies could only go in range from 2 miles, but he must have been somewhat close. All I heard, though, was mostly static, but a little, half a second of it was the sound of some sort of scream. And then it went back to static. Then today, this morning, I got it back, but it sounded somewhat like funeral music, but with a lot of talking and screaming in the background, and something that sounded like a bad quality sound of a car honking in the background. The talking was abnormal, as were the screams, but the screams were not much as the talking. The talking was too deep to be any human, and it lasted for about 20 seconds. Then the static and the screams took over. Funeral music still playing. The whole reception lasted for about 2 minutes. But after 1 minute, the funeral music began playing backwards. As creepy as it was, I talked into the walkie-talkie after 2 minutes and said, "Mark," and it all just went silent. I'm heading to work now with the walkie-talkie just in case I get more reception, and then I can show my boss that Mark is still alive. When I got there, within half a mile from there, in the car, the reception came back, except it was perfectly clear. I heard people talking, sounding sad, lots of noise and walking, and there was that same funeral music, not in reverse though. It kept receiving, and as I got closer and closer to where I work, it got clearer. Soon I could make it out. It was actually in my work building. I ran inside, taking the walkie-talkie with me, and once I opened the door, I jumped in surprise when my walkie-talkie began making the loud buzzing sound that happens when you put two phones next to each other. I turned it off. Everybody was looking at me, disappointingly, as if I did something wrong. It Everyone was wearing suits, and their attention soon got off of me, and I looked to the side of me. Something to the side of me caught my attention, so I looked desperately. Mark, in a casket holding his walkie-talkie. There were 5 other caskets. It was the dead bodies that were dangling there. The images of the dangling dead was reinserted into my mind, and I stared at the wall, seeing something. Static fuzzed over my thoughts. I had nothing. What is that? She lived deep in a forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. No one dared cross the old crone for fear that the cows would go dry, their food stores would rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbors and their children. Then, the little girls in the village began to disappear. One by one, no one could find out where they had gone. Grief-stricken families searched in the woods, the local buildings, all the houses and barns, but there's no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of the disappearances. Still, it was noted that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger, more attractive. The neighbors were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen treating the tooth with an herbal remedy when her daughter left the house. She screamed for her husband and followed the girl out the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together, they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and heading out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbors. They came to assist a frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed toward the strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him out into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree, holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell upon the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran towards the witch. When she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The far-sighted farmer had loaded his gun with silver bullets in case the witch ever came after his daughter. Now he took aim and shot at her. The bullet hit Bloody Mary in the hip and she fell to the ground. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back to the field, where they built a huge bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for her terrible death. When she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the woods and found the unmarked graves of the little girls the witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make herself young again. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear the bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Mary once did, and they will forever be trapped in the mirror. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the U.S. I've always been a night person, so I'd often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that Even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with a odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me, and deciding he was probably drunk. I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was still standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and the sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point, I ran away, or pulled up my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally had found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I watched him go, until he was far away and to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side of the road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but it was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. If you like this story, be sure to like and subscribe so you receive notifications when a new story comes up. As always, sleep tight and stay terrified.